Hi, Eric Rosen here. Welcome to the latest edition of the Rosen Report. It was recommended that we try a new restaurant called Pink Steak in West Palm Beach. I'm here to tell you, save your time and don't go. It was a huge disappointment. Nothing on the menu that we all tried got a high mark. Although the room was decent, the food was utterly disappointing. I had a tuna appetizer, which was a sushi roll. It was maybe a 2 or 3 out of 10, and it wasn't very good. I had rock shrimp, another big disappointment. My chicken dish was free-range chicken. Let's just say I wish they let the chicken continue to range free somewhere other than on my plate because it was hugely disappointing. The one highlight might have been my wife's shrimp dish, which had a backlit bowl that looked nice. They did have ample parking and free valet parking, but from a food perspective, save your time, save your money, and go elsewhere. Pink Steak is not where it's at. On to the main theme today of intellectual dishonesty. I think it's very important that we're honest about who we are as people, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and so we could develop and spend time on our weaknesses to make them better and work on them. And I'm reminded early in my career that I didn't always believe in that. And so I recall my first job, which was in large corporates at the Continental Bank in Chicago in 1993. It was not my favorite job. It was akin to Equities in Dallas, for those of you who love Liar's Poker, Michael Lewis's famous book. I was asked to make my first big presentation. And truth be told, I didn't understand the concepts about what I was trying to talk about. It was a very complicated restructuring in Latin America. And my boss asked me to do it. He asked if I needed help. And I wanted to show him and the team that I was capable. And I said, I got this. And I tried to do it myself. And once I stood up in front of 25 senior people, I realized I don't got this. And I did such a horrible job. It was humiliating. I thought I was going to have a stroke during the presentation because I realized as I was doing it, I was not doing a very nice job. My career took a hit in the sense that I lost a lot of credibility, and it all stemmed from the fact that I wasn't intellectually honest with being prepared. And had I asked for help and had other people help me better understand what I was trying to talk about, I think the outcome would have been different. But there's a silver lining. I took what I learned from that horrific experience where I literally got a negative score. If it was on a scale of 1 to 10, it was -5, how poorly I presented. And I vowed to myself I never wanted to do that bad in a presentation again. And I spent an incredible amount of time practicing in front of a mirror. Anytime I could get in front of a camera, I did it. Back then, it wasn't easy to do. We didn't have smartphones. And I practiced. I did it in front of people. I bought a little hand recorder and recorded myself. And I made what was a very bad weakness into a strength. And it was only after the fact of that horrible incident that I was intellectually honest. And I focused turning a weakness into a strength. And I think that's important. And I now get hired all over the country to do speaking engagements. I'm going to Vegas again next week after being there a few months ago. I interview people all the time. I do podcasts. I'm speaking at schools and I'm doing panels all across the country. To think that that would have been possible in 1993 is impossible because no one would have ever considered hiring me to do anything because I was a horrible public speaker. I make a lot of mistakes. I try not to make the same mistakes twice, but obviously I still do. This is a long-winded way of saying I think we could all learn and grow and develop if we're honest with ourselves about what our weaknesses are. And when I get negative feedback or constructive criticism on something I did or said or wrote, I try to learn from it. And I think you can all learn from my mistakes and my growth. On to Quick Bites, stocks were mixed this week, and there's a lot of economic data, strong GDP, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But the S&P was up about 1%. Nothing major. I would say that oil rallied over 6% this week, which was a big news on geopolitical risks and strong growth out of the U.S. and some China stimulus. The GDP increased 3.3% at an annualized rate, far more than the 2% that was thought. And the consumer remains shockingly resilient. I did not see this. I've been writing about the consumer and questioning the consumer with rising debt levels, higher credit card debt. We've seen some delinquencies in autos, delinquencies in credit cards. We've seen savings rates crash. They were over 33% peak COVID, and they're down to 3.7%. Having said that, the consumer's been resilient and has really led that, coupled with government spending, higher growth than anybody forecast. I've got some good charts on that topic. I've written a lot about college. Should you go to college versus vocational school? And there's another good article about that topic. And what we've seen is vocational schools and community colleges see enrollment go up while traditional colleges go down. And I think that trend is likely to continue for all the obvious reasons, cost versus benefit being the biggest driver. I have spoken extensively about entitlement reform and government spending. Druckenmiller's talking about it. Jamie Dimon is talking about it. And it just continues to get worse. We ran about a $1.7 trillion budget deficit despite 3.5% unemployment last year. And we continue to spend like drunken sailors. What's an interesting point here is we're seeing millennials want to have less kids. I'm going to read you the stat. Less than a fifth of millennials, specifically those between 26 and 35, are certain that they want to become parents today. And so as the population ages, people are living longer and healthcare costs go through the roof. Kids are not having kids. Young people are not having kids at the same rate, especially those who are environmentally savvy and are worried about the environment. They are not wanting to have children at a higher rate. So as you get older millennials between 36 and 41, 36% say they're not going to have kids. As healthcare costs rise, the population gets older, and the younger folks don't want to have kids. That's a recipe for disaster from a fiscal perspective. We need to rein in spending. I really like this LinkedIn post by Avi Gandhi. It was about comparing TV ad spend versus YouTube ad spend. And we've seen that a lot of people stop watching traditional TV, and the younger folks, they tend to do everything streaming. And I'm going to read you a couple statistics. 8.5 trillion TV ad views in 2023. And yet what we're seeing is TV total ads grew by only 2.2% to 44.5 million. But total impressions only went up 1.8% to 8.5 trillion. So impressions grew less than total ad runs. And so what we're also seeing is that a total of 43.7 billion were spent on total ads. When you look at the average views on a single TV ad, it's 191,000. That means the cost per 1,000 impressions is $5.14. When you compare that to YouTube ads, just for one example of social media, the average cost, CPM, cost per 1,000 impressions, is only 38 cents. And so I think we're going to see a continued push towards social media that can do more targeted advertising, and it's far more cost effective than traditional TV. I really like this chart here, which shows that ratings of 23 professions as measured by Gallup and what people rate them for honesty and ethics. And not shocking, at the bottom of the list is senators at 8% and Congress at 6%. So you can look at the list, but nurses top the list at 78%. But you can see it, and all of them, for the most part, are down from 2019. There's a lot of discussion about what's going on in Texas. So because of the border crisis, the governor of Texas put up some barbed wire to prevent illegal immigrants coming over. It went to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was illegal to do and that they had to take it down because it's the federal government's job to do that. Now, I'm a little frustrated with where we are in illegal immigration, and it's today the most talked about issue for 2024 in terms of the election is illegal immigration. You know, we've seen some bad incidents of crime. This week, a mother is suing Department of Homeland Security for $100 million over the rape and murder of her 17-year-old daughter at the hands of what is believed to be a gang member that came in illegally. And I believe that Texas should be able to do this, really to defend itself from illegal immigration, but we'll see how it plays out. Overall, I am for legal immigration. I think we need a process, and we have to handle it on a more rational and reasonable level. We cannot have millions of illegal immigrants coming through over the border a year. We can't handle it. Chicago, New York, San Francisco, all these cities are getting overrun. And who's going to pay for it? You, the taxpayer, are. 25 Republican governors signed in support of Texas. We'll see how this plays out, but it is being highly talked about. On to other headlines. The bond king, Bill Gross, thinks stocks are overstretched. He cited the price to earnings ratio of about 19 as being too high. So look at that. His former partner and colleague, Mohamed El-Erian, also had some concerns about the market. He thinks slowing consumer spending, inflation, and geopolitical risks will weigh on the markets. Interestingly, Tesla's Musk had to say that he wants to see some trade barriers because China EVs are going to overtake our market and they can be sold more cheaply in the United States. IBM saw shares rise as they topped estimates, but sadly, since 1984, IBM has sharply underperformed the S&P, averaging about 7% versus 11% for the S&P. But finally, they're getting their act together. LVMH on the luxury side rallied over 12% as earnings beat. And then Humana stock plunged 12% on disappointing earnings. And what we're seeing is a crisis in healthcare. I have some good charts about the spend. Healthcare costs are rising so fast that it's a problem. I'm going to tackle this at another time. I'm going to bring in an expert to help me. But I have a big concern about rising healthcare costs and America's spending per capita versus other countries. And what are outcomes? Our outcomes are not better despite spending so much money. There's a good article on Wall Street bonuses. Many people were disappointed where bonuses shook out. With respect to immigration, as I mentioned, it's a top voter concern, and there's a good article on that. 35% said immigration was a top concern, 32% said inflation was a top concern, and 25% economy and jobs. I am surprised that high suggested economy and jobs, given we're at full employment and most people have jobs that want them. Trump was dealt another blow on the Carroll case. The jury ruled an $83.3 million in damages for defamation against Carroll. That's going to be interesting. He's obviously appealing it. Taylor Swift's stalker was arrested again for dumpster diving outside of her apartment just minutes after being released. Florida passed a bill that's very interesting that would ban children under 16 from social media. Having two kids that are 16 and 17, I quite frankly think that social media is very dangerous. We acquiesced on phones late, not until 7th grade, because every other kid had them. But I think social media is very dangerous for children, and I like the direction of this. One of my two favorite restaurants are getting together. Carbone and Marea are getting together to expand Marea, and I believe they're opening in Palm Beach. I will say it again. The octopus fusilli pasta with bone marrow and breadcrumbs at Marea is my favorite pasta dish in America today. I look forward to it opening in Florida so I can have that. I'm going to try and make it myself. This was an interesting story. A woman was shamed for refusing to pay $150 for a group dinner when she only spent $25. And when you go out for a group dinner and somebody orders a really expensive bottle of wine, or, the special that costs $200 and you just order an appetizer, what's the right protocol? It's always awkward. There is no right answer. With respect to real estate, Hamptons prices continue to soar. There's a good article backing Miller Samuel, quoting some good data. The most expensive 10% of the homes that were transacted had a median quarter a price of $7.3 million and above, which is interesting. So Hamptons are back. My personal view is the best days of the Hamptons are behind it. I think it's gotten too crowded and too expensive. I like going for a short period of time. I no longer like being there for the summer, but I did spend 20 summers there. There's a very interesting article about the impact of Airbnb. There's Palm Springs, California. There's been some rule changes that don't allow new houses to have Airbnb, to use short-term rentals. And it's causing a major correction in prices. And so if you are grandfathered in on your house, you can continue to rent it short term. But when you go to sell it, you lose that grandfathering. And because so many counties within Palm Springs, or so many cities within Palm Springs, are over the limit, no new Airbnb licenses or short-term leasing licenses could be given until they fall under the limit. And so it's really causing a problem for houses. I hadn't thought about it, but it's very interesting. I hope you enjoyed today's report. Thank you, and I appreciate you listening to the Rosen Report.